Good afternoon. Welcome. While people are filing in, I'm going to just say a few words. I'm Joanne Geer. I'm the Executive Director for the Biopharma Research Council. And I have to say, I don't usually say this in the middle of the day of a complex conference, but my heart is full. We've had some really wonderful feedback already about the programs that we started earlier in the day, various workshops in collaboration with the Mercer Institute for Management and Training, as well as the Project Management Institute. Excuse me. Our organization is a nonprofit focused, we're focused upon bringing scientists, engineers, and IT professionals together with the mission of stimulating collaborations. Excuse me. Throughout the year, we hold a number of physical meetings of various scales and a number of webinars and virtual programs. I am always interested in your thoughts, comments, ideas for next year. In early December, we will be announcing our major programs for the year, and I encourage you, if something's intriguing, come give us advice, join a committee, and get involved in any way you like. We now have a community of about 10,000, which is primarily East Coast, lots in New Jersey, because we're based here near Red Bank. Excuse me. And then we are also national and international because we do a lot of virtual programs as well. I'm going to introduce our speaker. I have to really appreciate Dr. Van Loquin, someone who I think I searched you out on LinkedIn, I think was how I first came across you. And we've had many conversations. He did a webinar for us earlier in the week and has very generously joined us today to give his talk, which is on, and so he's the president of the Healthcare Science Advisors, and his talk is on, as you can see, diagnosing production issues requires doing these three things well. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good. All right. Diagnosing drug manufacturing production issues requires doing what? It takes a lot of things to do it well. So I'm going to walk you through some of these things, explain some of what I find to be underpinning why drug manufacturing production issues typically aren't properly identified and even less frequently are resolved properly. So first things first, as Joanne said, on behalf of BRC and Healthcare Science Advisors, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to kick off the afternoon plenary session today. And I know we've got a great afternoon of some panel discussions and some refreshments later on as well. In summary, so the things that I'll cover in the next 40 or so minutes, why should your environment be properly established for improving processes? Why does it matter to have an environment set up in order to robustly identify and improve processes? Next, are your programs effective? And if you think they are, how do you know? So this gets to data management issues. So how are you measuring whether or not things are going well or things are not going as well as you'd hoped? And then I'm going to talk about understanding of a process. What does it mean to have a process? What does it mean if you don't have processes robustly identified? The next one is no-blame culture. So understanding what a no-blame culture means for identifying and resolving process and production issues. And then I'll summarize and we'll do some Q&A. So on data management first and foremost, why would we care about gathering proper data? Well, because data, forensically speaking, is really what amounts to our primary evidence. And some data that I'm going to show you from Gallup, better evidence generates solutions which are 14 to 20 times less likely to be incorrect or require rework. So you don't have to refix things that you've already fixed. Also, better evidence leads to repeatable solutions and not special opinions. So you want to remove as much anecdote as you can and be objective. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why we have some perils in what we think is objective thinking, but actually isn't. Now, poorly made and low evidentiary decisions, again, according to Gallup, cost organizations $3,400 for every $10,000 in salary. So that's about a third. And finally, poorly made and low evidentiary decisions cost the economy about $328 billion annually in the US. Now, I'm going to show you a chart here, and these are Gallup data as well. Companies that do data collection and identification of issues the best relative to the others have much greater improvements in terms of resolving quality defects, so 60% fewer quality defects, about half the safety incidents, lower absenteeism by about a third, shrinkage reduced by about a quarter, as well as turnover, and productivity gains of about 18%. So the perils of poor measurement. Why is it important to do measurement well? It's important because without properly measuring and without having good data management and the ability to collate and archive data to be able to draw these correlations and generate hypotheses, our decision-making suffers greatly. So there's kind of a statistical joke about this. If you have your head in the oven and your ass in a bucket of ice water, on average, you're comfortable. But the question is, what does the average really have to tell us when there's two extremes, right? Now, different types of cultures and how different types of cultures allow us to either measure properly and approach production issues in a more proper way versus the rest that don't. Typically, in an econometrics sense, you would hear this being called risk-averse versus risk-seeking. Typically, we talk about it in pharma and in some other industries as well as risk-mature organizations versus risk-immature organizations. So companies who are more mature in terms of risk assessment and management are more likely to use proper practices of measurement, using better data and evidence to draw their conclusions and make decisions. Now, here's a question. So what sunscreen do you buy? And I suppose I'll have to phrase it a different way. With a show of hands, who buys sunscreen regularly? Okay. And then if I said why, what message or knowledge do we retain? What brand do you buy? Do you buy, for example, Neutrogena's sun something that's SPF 15? And if so, there's one. If so, why that one? Why not a different one? So, here's a few different types that you may find. Is it based on the color of the bottle? Is it the shape of the bottle? Is it some other marketing incentive that we're falling prey to? There's a lot of data that exists about chemical sunscreens versus physical blocking sunscreens. So those sunscreens with oxybenzone and homosalate can, on skin coupon studies, lead to greater DNA damage than those which use zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. So we buy sunscreens a lot. The question is, how do we know that they're working? How do we know which ones are the best? But we fall into the trap of being brand aware. And very much like cigarettes, once someone has purchased a particular brand, it's very difficult to get them to switch brands. So that's why there's sticks, that's why there's spray-ons. It's all about different modalities to get people to make a different decision. The next question, how many people take supplements? Anybody? All right, so more than half at least, 3/4, which is amazing. So especially in pharma and life science audiences, when you ask the question, do you take supplements, the question that naturally follows is why? Since we know that there are no pieces of robust evidence suggesting that supplements do anything for us, but we buy them. We buy them to the scale of $32 billion per year in the United States. 32 billion. Now that's a statistic, as you can see, from 2013, but this year was very similar. It was on the order of about 30 billion plus minus, so still in the pocket. Now by 2021, according to Forbes, this industry is expected to increase to be about a $60 to $62 billion a year industry. So over the next 5 or so years, we're talking about almost doubling the supplement market. But again, what are we doing when we're buying these things? We're marginalizing evidence in favor of anecdote. We think that something should work. There's a very strong placebo effect potentially. So we don't really care about what the data have to say and the evidence. We really like our anecdotes a lot. What does that have to do with anything? Well, when we solve production issues, whether it's in drug discovery, anything in R&D, clinical development, manufacturing and production, final fill and finish, lyophilization. These are all rife with people who tend to use anecdote, field knowledge, and personal bias to make decisions. So we need to make better decisions by incorporating more data and evidence. So, how do we measure? We measure properly by doing something that looks like the following. There's the universe of data on the left, so it could be anything. The data are essentially source agnostic. However, then we have biases, so our own personal biases, pre-selections, we filter things, and what that leads to, in a lot of cases, it could be confirmation bias. But when we're sorting data for information's sake, all of our biases are going into this process. So we very rarely, almost never, frankly, have an unbiased set of data that we're using to make decisions. And then the process, of course, looks something like this, where you've got data, you've sorted it in some manner, you've arranged it then, and then you present it visually. And my caution here is, when you're setting up and executing this data collection and producing charts, make sure that you're not creating data-impoverished charts. We can do a lot of swaying of people's beliefs by creating charts that seem to look pretty fancy like infographics, but really are almost entirely devoid of real information. And then measure the right things. So the data always have a story to tell. So there's always stuff within the data, and we need to identify it. And again, this comes without us pre-biasing how we're selecting or analyzing the data. And then don't react without just cause. So this is null hypothesis significance testing at its face. It could even be Bayesian inference, but the idea really primarily is if you don't have reason to act or react, then don't do it. So the data at the bottom here are just 3 different audit bodies, which you may not be able to see the way the screen's cut off, but there's US FDA on here, there's OSHA, and there's ISO. And the question initially was between 2011, 2012, and 2013, was there a difference in particular findings that each agency had and what the organizations were going to do? This generated lots of concern and consternation, worry, and anxiety. However, when you actually looked at the data set behind this simple chart, what you realize is that with confidence intervals included, there was no difference between 2011, 2012, and 2013. So there was not much reason to take any abnormal action, but it drove a lot of abnormal action within different organizations. So how can you be really sure your data are telling you what you think they are? This is an interesting chart. So this is United States, 1961 to 1969. The x-axis is the unemployment rate in percent, ranging from 0% to 10%. The y-axis is the inflation rate. So as we look at this, this could be any production data set, and you say, well, look at this, that's interesting. So let me see, how does this work? As inflation rate, wait a minute, goes down, the unemployment rate is going up. What should we do about this? However, if you include the 1970 to 2012 data, you'll see that it's not much signal and a lot of noise. So there's not really cause to do much of anything about the data on the left, and instead look for a greater data set. Now, John Ioannidis wrote a piece which was called Why Most Published Studies Are Wrong. It's been often cited thousands of times, and in part, the paper says, a research finding is less likely to be true when the studies conducted in a field are smaller. So it could be within an organization. One group, for example, is collecting data, very small sample sizes. When effect sizes are smaller, when there is a greater number and lesser pre-selection of tested relationships, sounds like an uncontrolled observational study, where there is greater flexibility in designs, definitions, outcomes, analytical modes. Well, we do this all the time, don't we? We create bar charts about stuff we just feel like. And where there is greater financial and other interest and prejudice. That's interesting. So typically the groups then that want to have things be true and spend more money on projects and programs find relationships that support what they're trying to do. This is not the direction that causality should go in. Now, when more teams are involved also, I'll talk a little bit about the bullwhip effect later, but when there are more teams involved in a scientific field in chase of statistical significance, that's another warning sign. Now, beware analytics that seem to support your idea. This could be big data. Maybe you have very large databases. And if you do, you shouldn't forget the parable of Google flu. So, anyone heard about this? So, Google flu was designed to track and predict what the CDC flu data were going to show us as a nation. However, what was found after a few years' worth of data is that the Google estimates more than doubled what the CDC ended up finding in terms of confirmatory flu cases. So the predictive value has been written about several times, being a low, that is. So there can be lots of things behind the data, what sorts of search terms, when people are plugging in what is the actual underlying lagged CDC indicator involved. But the fact of the matter is, relying blindly on big data certainly isn't the answer. The answer is to be smarter about data measurement, the collection of evidence, primary evidence, and decision making. So John Tukey, the famous mathematician and statistician, if you've ever designed a box plot, he was the guy that created the box plot. Well, I'll let you read that. Okay. So then risk. I mentioned risk earlier. So how do you go about solving the right issues? Well, you have to decide which ones are higher risk than other ones. You can't solve everything, nor do you want to. So how is risk appraised? Why is it important, and what's R? R is the classic formula for risk, the probability of failure times the magnitude of consequence. How likely is something to go wrong? And if it does go wrong, how big is the consequence? How consequential is it going wrong? Now, this graphic here was adapted from James Reason, his 1990 book on human accident prevention. It's called the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. Now, what this model intends to do is give you a sense that there are things, these barriers of Swiss cheese, that we put in place in organizations that hope to reduce, prevent, insulate us from risk. And how does it do that? Well, there are certainly procedures that we have, policies, standard operating procedures. There's also physical barriers, maybe it's PPE in production areas. There's training, there's organizational culture. Each of these layers of Swiss cheese reduces the probability, there's a rolled throughput yield probability that a risk that's impinging on the right side will make it through to the end and lead to either patient harm in the market, hopefully not, or employees being injured on the job, or something else consequential to the company. It could be poor market performance. It could be the community has bad public perception about the company. Ultimately, we want to add either more layers of Swiss cheese or we want to shrink the holes. Either case, creating this defense in layers approach to protect us from risk. Who's at risk? Unfortunately, maybe surprisingly, it's us. 1 in 3 deaths in the US is due to medical error. Did you know that? The British Medical Journal, now BMJ, if you go look, they're officially BMJ, not British Medical Journal anymore. They have published on this very topic, medical error, the 3rd leading cause of death in the US. So interesting. You've got heart disease. About 611,000 people die per year from heart disease in the analysis period. Cancer, 585,000 per year. Medical error is this magenta circle. And then this box here, which you can't read, says something to the effect of medical error isn't listed on death certificates. Isn't that convenient? Now, part of the paper reads that, based on an analysis of prior research, Johns Hopkins study estimates that more than 250,000 Americans die every year from medical errors. On the CDC's official list, that would rank just behind heart disease and cancer, which each took about 600,000 lives in 2014, and it would lead respiratory disease with about 150,000 deaths. Medical mistakes that can lead to death range from surgical complications that go unrecognized to mix up with the dose or types of medications patients receive. So it could be surgical interventions, it could be contamination, it could be drug dosing gaffes. This is why, for example, FDA has cracked down on naming conventions for new drugs. So they have names which are within class associated, so there are fewer mix-ups. So why do we need formal tools to assess risk? Well, because we're not good gauges at risk. We're human, we have fallibilities, we all produce errors when we try to estimate likelihoods and outcomes. And as Sir Arthur Eddington has mentioned, he was a famous 19th century British astrophysicist, for those who follow that. He says, we often think that when we have completed our study of one, we know all about two, because two is one and one. However, we forget that we still have to make a study of and. So what's that operation going on between the things that we think we know and the actual outcome? In hazard loss estimation, so this is important for production facilities. Any serious evaluation of risk, if you think you're doing risk assessment and you don't do this, then you're not. Any serious evaluation of risk takes into account the following four factors: hazard, inventory, vulnerability, and loss. As more of the inventory moves leftward into the hazard region, as you can see visually, that increases the scope of the center, which is the vulnerability of the inventory. So you need to make sure you understand the hazard's potential impact on inventory. It could be finished drug product, it could be anything in the supply chain, raw materials. So interestingly, JPL, when we, the US, send ships far into space, JPL has newer methods now for optimizing sequential decisions, which look something like this to the computer, but instead uses what's called a risk allocation algorithm, which, as they say, decomposes a joint chance into a set of individual chance constraints and distributes risk. So basically, the system is trying to penalize itself and find out the best ways to go about. It could be finding a route across the surface of Mars. It could be different flight paths and attitude adjustments. Now, the quality of your available data should inform the resolution of measurement. So I've seen in a lot of cases in different organizations where you might have failure modes and effects analysis, FMEA. Everyone familiar with that? Typically, those are scaled on a 1 to 10. So you'll have severity, probability of occurrence, and detectability. And each of those are ranked 1 to 10, and then you multiply the three together for an overall risk, the risk prioritization number. However, if you're talking about things that very rarely happen, or something that maybe happens pretty frequently but doesn't get detected that often, it's nearly impossible to actually apply a 1 to 10 scoring to this. And what you end up finding is that teams say, well, let's call it a 5. We don't want to make it disappear from the list, but we got to do something. So when you've got so many different intervals to rank something within, yet you don't have underlying data to support ranking on a scale like 1 to 10, it makes more sense to change your levels of measurement. And that way you're not fooling yourself into thinking you know something that you don't. So as an example, the Mosby visual analog pain scale that you may have seen if you've been to a hospital, on a 1 to 10 scale, how much does this hurt? Well, unfortunately, it's very difficult to get inter-rater variability excluded. So what's an 8 to me may be a 1 to Joanne, or whatever. The fact of the matter is, now there's these Chernoff faces, which allow you to take a 1 to 10 scale, and it breaks it down into 6 different faces. How frowny are you? So you've automatically now reduced some level of resolution in the measurement. Probably even better would be something like a Likert 1 to 5 scale. You can have a low, medium, high Likert scale, even a binary low, high, but don't fool yourself into creating greater levels of measurement than you can actually support. If you have to calibrate your raters, you can. I would suggest in a lot of cases calibrating different people to appraise risk. If you use Kendall's coefficient of concordance, you can really get a nice sense of which raters are rating like their peers and which ones aren't. Now, if we take another look at NASA, so the New Horizons probe, which was launched in January of 2006, it reached Pluto 14 July of last year. It takes about 4.5 hours for radio signals traveling at sea to get to us on Earth. That's a long way away. 4.5 light hours. And before the launch, this is the best image we had of Pluto, and now after the flyby, we get something like this. So how does NASA work with potential risks, hazards, and collision? Here's their scale, the Torino Impact Hazard Scale. They only use 4 colors, which is non-Likert as well, and they bin lots of stuff together. And then afterwards, they can assign scoring to it, but they're really only using green, yellow, amber, and red. And this is with lots and lots of Newtonian mechanics plugged in to be able to send a probe billions of miles away. And I don't think we have that resolution of data. Why is appropriate precision important? Because unchecked subjectivity in approaches leads to inappropriate countermeasures. So these are kappa. If you're not measuring properly, how do you know what to fix and how do you know how to fix it? This false alarm rate drives mismanagement. This is the typical type 1 error versus type 2 error issue. And you want to make sure that you're not finding too many false positives, and you certainly don't want to be calling something critical a false negative. So is there really smoke, or do you just think there is? And then I talked about the behavioral perceptions of risk. So how do people perceive risk? The answer is not very logically. So unfamiliar technologies that have catastrophic potential, like nuclear power, cause people to way overestimate risk. And this is why having structured scoring models done appropriately can save us from ourselves. Now, this is from a Wharton study. This was a group of managers given some data to paw through and make some decisions. In a study where this group was faced with hypothetical managerial decisions, fewer than 1 in 4, so that's less than 25% of the management cohort, asked for probabilistic information, and none sought precise likelihood data when it was available. In a group presented with precise likelihood data, now they had the data, precise likelihoods, this was like peering behind the veil. Fewer than 1 in 5 drew upon the concepts of probability to determine their courses of alternate action. So this is all about making decisions because we think we know what's right, rather than allowing the data to help us decide objectively. Also, a company is considering flood insurance for the 25-year life of a production facility. This is another interesting one. Managers and site directors are more likely to take seriously the risk of a 1 in 100-year flood if it's presented as having a greater than 1 in 5 chance of occurring in a 25-year period, rather than a 1 in 100 chance that it will occur the next year. So it really depends how the data are framed. Homeowners in California most often buy earthquake insurance after they've experienced an earthquake themselves. After. When did Noah build the ark? Before the rain. Okay, we generally dismiss low probability events until and unless we personally experience them, and then we change our course of behavior. What we can do is a Monte Carlo approach, for example. So well validated, you can do some simulations to see how your process is running, how different subordinate steps in your process are running, and try to understand how you're likely to function from a capability sense from one batch to the next, one day to the next, or what have you. Now, ultimately, when we get to the nuts and bolts of risk management, we seek to address an ordinal list of potential business threats, so things that are low versus medium and high, and decide what we want to fix. Well, ICHQ 9 says our level of effort should be commensurate with the level of risk. So those things that are at the top, we should percolate to the top of our ordinal list on our risk register of items to address. And then we can always measure and see, are we getting better? Are we reducing variation? Is performance improving? This is an example of some data where we were tasked to look at geriatric populations who were not consuming their solid dose medication. So these are tablets and capsules. And these were cohorts of males and females 65 and over. And the question became, Why aren't they taking their solid dose medication? Now, the incoming hypothesis, and I'll get to the punchline right away, the confirmatory bias hypothesis was, well, they probably forgot. They're getting a little older, maybe they have a lot of meds, they just forgot. So let's remind them more often. Let's send them texts, let's call them at home, we can send them emails. Well, when it turned out we looked at the data, that's not exactly at all what was found. So if I said, what reasons of non-compliance should we go after? The story is here. The first one, in order, dosing instructions are unclear. So the group of people didn't know, maybe this was a QD medication, maybe it was BID, they didn't understand exactly what was to occur, and therefore they didn't take it as they were prescribed. So that's certainly not forgetting. Second place, tablet size too large. Well, we certainly know that geriatric groups tend to have higher incidences of dysphagia. It becomes more difficult to swallow, especially larger tablets, capsules, anything else, and especially because people take, in this age range, usually on average 5.5 medications. So you get to the point where how many tablets do you want to swallow? And it gets more and more difficult. And in third place, unclear on the benefit profile. So again, it has nothing to do with forgetting. Instead, it's, I'm not sure when I'm supposed to take it, I can't swallow this, and I don't even know what it's doing for me because I have 5.5 other medications to take. So all of these things can be tangibly addressed. And none, by the way, are forgetting. Forgetting falls way down here. So just the first three represent 75.2% of all incidences of noncompliance. Now, as I promised, the bullwhip effect. So the bullwhip effect increases as we have greater numbers of sites around the world, different equipment and systems, different electronic systems, different physical systems, machines, different teams, different SOPs. And essentially what happens is over time, we start to see more and more variation that becomes uncontrolled that we didn't think of. Very similar to what you might see as a stock sparkline in the Wall Street Journal, where right about here is today, and then everything rightward falls in this uncertainty zone where you really can't say what's going to happen. So we want to be able to say, here's what's going on in each of the steps in our process so we can properly categorize what happens next. Here is an interesting data set. This is the gravitational constant measured by sites and different groups of people around the world. So you should think that it would be 6.67 times 10 to the negative 11th. And that's not what every group finds. That's not what every country finds or project team. These are all the data with confidence intervals about the gravitational constant measured in different countries and with different people. So maybe there's financial incentives, maybe it's different equipment setup, lots of things. Now, DJ Patil, he's the chief data scientist for the White House right now, formerly a chaotician. In 2012, he coined a phrase called the next 2 hours era, which I liked. He and I had a chat several years ago about this, and he basically is not in favor of strategic planning out more than 6 months, and often less. Because we live in this next 2 hours era, how can you possibly know what next year is going to bring in the market, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 5 years to draw up a strategic plan? If you think you know more than that, you're fooling yourself, because there's all the external environmental uncertainty effects involved. So understand that the market is uncertain. Our processes can be uncertain unless we're using something like quality by design and characterizing our process steps well, and make sure you bake that into your models. How much don't you know? How you set up your data collection and experimental trials for anything, your production process. How you set up your data collection matters a great deal. Think back to the gravitational measurements. This one's a little less stringent. This is a measurement of how many licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. This was conducted by licking machines and lickers. In the licking machines at Purdue University, it took 364. At University of Michigan, 411, and at Harvard, 2,255. That's a big difference. I wonder how they set it up. That's what matters. With people, at Swarthmore College, 144, at University of Cambridge, 3,481. That's a parsimonious lick. At Purdue, 252. And then, don't fool yourself in what you think you know, but you don't. It's also true, this comes from a piece that was in Significance magazine. For extremely rare events, correct uncertainty estimates may lead us to conclude that we know virtually nothing. This is not such a bad thing. If we really know nothing, we should say so. All of this is captured within ICHQ9, where I've put red dots on here, are places where we can directly influence the outcome of risk assessment, as well as where our biases may derail us. So be very careful, because there's a lot of red dots on a lot of process steps. Now, to understand the process, realize, as management guru W. Edwards Deming said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So how does QBD fit into this? Quality by design was itself designed to strongly encourage, which is force, us as an industry to consider processes for what they really are. And we should be able to use all of the appropriate analytics to make smarter decisions. Now, if you think about getting somewhere, a conference could be to here, there's a lot of steps, subordinate processes within the overall process. There's heading to the airport, there's e-ticketing, security checks, boarding and taxiing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the question is, do you get to where you're trying to get to on time? And this could be your production process. Do we know what's coming out the back end? And it could be these similar steps. Ultimately, the question is, are you getting data which are within your specification limits, or are you not? And if not, then you better go back and think about the subordinate steps and the processes within to better characterize. Ultimately, planning for success rather than planning to fix failure. Uncertainty closes with our friend Donald Rumsfeld's quote on the topic. So we know about our known knowns. We know there's known unknowns, and there's unknown unknowns. And as he says, if one looks throughout the history of our country and other free countries, it is the latter category that tend to be the difficult ones, those unknown unknowns. Always a problem. And finally, the no-blame culture. So no problem is a problem. This can be interpreted two ways. Either if you don't have any problems identified, that's a problem in and of itself, or it could be that saying that you don't have a problem is a problem. It's a big problem beyond just linguistically. So what is a problem? Defined as a gap between the current real situation and the ideal situation. This gap is the problem. So Mark Rosenthal came up with this paraphrase. So sometimes no problem is a sign of a different problem. If everything on a dashboard is green, that's a terrible problem, because that means there's nothing to fix, and you should be virtually guaranteed of having high performance outputs every time. So don't fool yourself with a sense of misplaced optimism. Feel free to identify problems. In the end, the majority of causes of deviations in the pharma industry aren't due to human error. They're systemic. For these, you need proper root cause analysis and proper CAPA programs to address, to identify, and correct the issue or prevent the issue. Now, think about this. Your job in correcting and preventing defects, which is CAPA, is to reduce or eliminate the potential for problems to recur. A great model of this is the gas cap. So you either have a gas cap on it, which says in small print here, what does it say? Do not forget cap. Okay, I won't do that. Or you have the intermediary fix, which is a tether, but you can undo the tether if you choose. Or there are these septum valves now, which don't have any caps, so you can't lose it. So think about greater error prevention. Stronger countermeasures are hard to casually reverse or do incorrectly. And principally, that's what you want to go for. Now, don't even bother using advanced tools if you're not using fundamental RCA tools. So Shigeo Shingo said to use a relentless barrage of whys. This is where we get the 5 whys from. Use it often. There's a sentinel event. Keep asking why. Or Kaoru Ishikawa, who came up with the fishbone diagram. And I'll also say that the customary way of the 6 M categories is one way, but there are many other ways to do it. You could do it by manufacturing process steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, and the causal factors within each, which are leading to some effect, an untoward effect that you need to solve. And finally, don't find yourself in this situation where the plan is to have continuous improvement of issues plus respect for people, and your actual is you try to have continuous improvement. Sometimes if you're asking why, you might be within the Deming cycle. Plan, do, check, act, plan, do, study, adjust. On the other side, the so-called dooming cycle of surprise, reaction, fix, and forget. Don't be there. So in summary, key takeaways: proper approaches for addressing production issues include looking at the current functioning of data management, understanding of processes, really understanding processes and not fooling yourself, and a no-blame culture. Proper resolution to production issues must assess and challenge systems, and this includes proper investigational approaches. Make sure you're collecting appropriate data, and there's a right way to properly measure and analyze risks. You, that's we, all, are the architects who can implement and/or improve proper practices. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon and evening. Any questions? I'll be at the bar later. You can hit me up then. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Campbell-Matland, and we're going to now start the sustainability panel. Just by way of introduction, I'm an independent consultant in the medical device industry, where I work with medical device startups transitioning their innovation into the commercialization process, and also universities with their research and technology commercialization and tech transfer efforts. I'm very excited that we have 2 excellent speakers for the sustainability panel. First up will be Bob Hall from Active Power. He is a sales engineer and strategic accounts representative of Active Power, where he works with industries, many different industries, with helping them to implement solutions for clean energy and uninterruptible power. He is a very skilled critical systems power engineer with 35 years experience in the industry. And also Mike Sarikman from USDM Life Sciences. He works as a member of their UDI, Unique Device Identifier practice, where he helps healthcare manufacturers implement solutions in their supply chain processes, data management, and labeling to address the worldwide regulations for unique device identifiers for medical devices. And he also has served on standard practice groups such as GS1 for supply chain practices. So we'll start off with both Mike and Bob. Bob first, with giving short presentations and then opening up for questions. And I hope we'll have a lively discussion on various topics in the area of sustainability. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming today. My name is Bob Hall, and I'm with Active Power, a supplier of flywheel, battery-free, uninterruptible power supplies. Last week in a meeting in your industry, in the farm industry, a buyer asked me, why should I select Active Power to support my facility? He said, whenever we lose a batch, it costs me $10 million, and I just can't have that. Well, at Active Power, we solve our customers' problems, helping them achieve their manufacturing objectives. Over the last 15 years, we've helped hundreds of manufacturers achieve their goals with our UPS solutions. So what are the most common challenges that we hear from manufacturers? Productivity is critical to your company's mission, and minimizing costs are essential. In one way or another, everyone here is affected by these three concerns: global competition, increased levels of automation, and a never-ending quest to drive quality and productivity while lowering costs. Manufacturing facilities today are mission critical. It's imperative that production lines stay up and running all the time. You need to have reliable electric power in your facilities. Well, how can Active Power help you meet these challenges? We have over 1,300 installed machines in mission-critical manufacturing facilities around the world at an installed base of nearly 5,000 in more than 50 countries. And our customers tell us the reasons they select Active Power in support of their facilities, or to address utility power problems, fit in existing space, improve overall productivity. What we deliver them is a system that ultimately they can trust to keep their facility up and running. When choosing UPSs, or power conditioning or power protection for your facility, you should always ask, what's the most cost-effective way to safeguard your process? The Active Power solution will improve your process while keeping an eye on your bottom line. With a flywheel UPS system, you protect your entire operation from power disturbances like voltage sags, surges, or complete outages, which are devastating to your productivity. You save up to 40% in total cost of ownership due to higher efficiency and a permanent energy storage, while improving overall system reliability. And you save valuable floor space with a power-dense, space-efficient solution that can be placed on the manufacturing floor without the need to deploy custom air conditioning or monitoring systems. Active Power is in the business of savings. With a great total cost of ownership, we save your facility money. With the highest level of reliability, we save you in worry and give you peace of mind. And with engineered-in sustainability, we help save the environment. Here's a selection of our customers that have chosen us to support their manufacturing processes around the world and have realized those savings. Whether your most critical operation is lyo, fermentation, packaging, or something else, our products have improved their bottom line and will improve yours as well. We're providing these customers with a competitive advantage, delivering tangible economic and performance benefits they can't find anywhere else. So how do we do this? If you have any experience at all solving utility power issues, you know that the lead-acid batteries are the most common type of energy storage. But there are challenges that come with batteries. Multiple replacements, degradation over time. Hello, there we go. Degradation over time, dedicated cooling and monitoring, and the not so little fact, the batteries are the most common cause of UPS-related load drops. Now let me tell you a better energy storage option. Active power flywheels. No degradation over time in energy storage. It's permanent energy storage and no air conditioning required. And a compact and integrated UPS enclosure with a single point of responsibility and always available when it's required. There is a better option out there, and a flywheel UPS addresses the three major goals we highlighted earlier: cost savings, reliability, and sustainability. Let me show you how we save. Total cost of ownership is by far the most important economic factor in a UPS, 3 to 5 times more important than first cost alone. The decisions you make today will save you millions of dollars over the life of the product and your facility. In this sample, we're showing a 1 megawatt UPS running at about 75% load with a 1% efficiency advantage and no conventional battery replacements. The cost of ownership will look something like this. Price competitive up front, cheaper and easier to install and commission, and no replacements for as long as you own the product. Normally 15 to 20 years. Now looking at a competitive technology. Technology is competitive at initial cost, but because of the lower efficiency and at the first battery change, you've already spent $300,000 more with a battery-based technology than active power, and that just keeps going and going. At the end of 15 years, you've spent about $800,000 more than if you'd purchased an active power system. And that money just goes straight to the bottom line. In breaking down the example, assume the UPSs cost about the same. Installation can be about 20% less because of fewer components to install and no battery installation or infrastructure. Assume the maintenance costs are about the same. Big savings come from electrical and cooling costs. Again, remember, the efficiency of the flywheel system is 1 to 2% greater than the conventional technology. It also means you don't need to pay as much or put as much cooling in your facility, because the active power system can run up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit with no degradation of performance, no increase in maintenance, and no decrease in reliability. And the biggest savings comes from not ever having to replace batteries. With permanent energy storage of a flywheel system, you don't have to go through the 3 to 5 year change-out period of replacing lead-acid batteries. And again, the savings go straight to your bottom line. Now, in regards to reliability, we commissioned a leading reliability firm, engineering firm, to compare our flywheel UPSs with battery-based systems. They determined that a flywheel UPS is 12 times less likely to fail, mainly because of no unexpected battery failures. 12 times less likely to fail. I'm sure your management would love to hear that if you installed a system to protect their loads. And this has been proven in our field data as well. Our MTBF for failures, including flywheel energy storage issues gives us a demonstrated MTBF of over 2 million hours in actual field data. Competitive UPSs will throw MTBF numbers out all the time, but if you ask them, they will never include the MTBF of the battery system because the batteries are unreliable and unpredictable, and that number added to the UPS manufacturer's number would probably be upsetting. So cost savings, improved reliability, and finally, achieving sustainability goals. Flywheel UPS solutions have tremendous advantage for environmental sustainability. There's high energy efficiency, innovative design and permanent energy storage, and no lead-acid batteries. You can decide to reduce your carbon footprint by simply choosing flywheel technology. And this makes you smart and responsible for choosing to make your facility green conscious. Flywheel consumes 90% less carbon to manufacture than battery systems, and because of its energy efficiency and lack of replacements, it emits 40% less carbon over the 15-20-year period of the life of a typical system or plant. Your facility will emit thousands of tons less carbon into the environment with flywheel UPS systems, helping you achieve your corporate goals and improving the environment. Thank you. And Mike. Yours.
All right, how's everyone doing today? So I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a slightly different angle. I'm looking at sustainability from, I'm going to say, from a project management and manufacturing perspective. So my background is really, like I said, in manufacturing, and I would say I kind of grew up in a lean kind of philosophy, where our primary goals were really, reducing waste, eliminating failures. Some of the things that Bob was talking about in terms of MBTF and things along those lines, but actually a lot of the same folks that our previous speaker talked about were the same people that I was reading and using as models for a lot of the work that I was doing as an engineer in terms of Shingo and Deming and the others. And really what we were really trying to focus on was getting down to figure out how we can make sure that what we're producing meets our demands, we're not making extra product, and how we can make sure that we're making the right products at the right time and eliminating any kind of waste all the way throughout the manufacturing process. And now, back when, I'll say in the 90s, 2000s, that was just good operations, good operational management. Well, in the last few years, it's become branded a bit. Now we have a new brand, a new term that's being used. It's called sustainability. So at the end of the day, the way I look at it is if you're operating and if you're running a clean and a well-managed operation, you almost by definition have to be or are going to be sustainable. If you're not creating waste, if you're looking at what kind of materials you're putting out into the environment, and that includes both just various scrap, reworked material, material that doesn't meet your specifications. Bob had mentioned earlier about batches being lost because of various process variations. These are all things that are effectively ways of causing waste in your process. So if you're adopting various kinds of lean quality measures, things along those lines, you're getting yourself in a very good place to meet any kind of sustainability goals you may have in your corporate strategy. Now, another component is things like how do we execute change more effectively? There's various kinds of ways of eliminating waste, and one of them is effectively how do we use our human and technological and other resources more effectively. We're always looking at doing things better, and the way you do things better is typically by implementing some kind of a change in your existing processes. If you're maintaining the current process, it's effectively status quo. You're not looking at getting anything better. That's really where project management comes in. So how do we deliver on those changes more effectively? We have a defined process and we have a methodology for delivering on those changes. And that's really, again, where project management comes in and leveraging a consistent, sustainable, and repeatable process for delivering on that change. If you look at the project management body of knowledge, there's a number of knowledge areas. I believe we have 10 knowledge areas. Don't ask me to quote them. But in particular, we have 5 kind of primary phases of a project. We have initiation, planning, execution, implementation, and closure. And by leveraging each of those 5 steps, we can make sure that all the effort and energy we're putting into implementing any kind of a change, any kind of a process improvement, is going to be delivered both on time, within budget, and most importantly, meeting expectations. So, in the end of the day, my message really is, if you want to be a sustainable organization, if you want to be a sustainable manufacturer, the methods that you use to manage, oversee, and control your manufacturing processes are really a critical factor. You can look at, and your green metrics and all those kinds of things, and those are great. But at the end of the day, it's really about how you manage and how you measure your operation. And the second side of that is how you implement change and how you implement improvements. And by using some of the well-known tools, like Lean and well-established project management standards, like you see that are espoused by Project Management Institute and other similar bodies, you can bring those two together and establish and maintain and create a sustainable and a cost-effective organization. Thank you.
Start with a couple questions of my own, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So, Bob, for you, how do you work with customers when implementing sustainability into their operations?
So this doesn't work, this
Oh, do
is
you want
working. Does it matter? This one's on? Something's on, okay. So, as we mentioned, I've been in the power quality industry for 35 years, which just seems to go much, much faster than when I was younger I ever thought it would. And until the early 90s, there were not many options when you're looking at power quality and protecting a facility other than doing some kind of a system which used battery energy storage. But since the early 90s, there have been a lot of options available to customers, primarily European options out of Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands, for flywheel-based systems or systems that didn't require electrochemical batteries in a facility. And so since then, I have been almost exclusively in flywheel energy storage and have been able to have the ability to talk to customers and work with them on systems where they could be greener, allowing them to meet corporate mission statements and goals, to stay away from things, not just electrochemical batteries, but also, diesel engines tend to be an issue for some people, but they're highly relied upon in the mission critical industry because they're so reliable as opposed to natural gas. But it's really being able to offer clients, options that do allow them to meet their goals. And flywheels right now in energy storage is about it, other than maybe ultra caps, which are very limited. And if you haven't done anything with power conditioning or electric power storage over the years, maybe it's not in your job description or what your company really looks at. It would be good to look at it, and I'm sure it would improve your productivity in your processes.
Thank you. And Mike, in the project management process, how early do you look at sustainability, and how do you build it into the processes that the team is going to conduct?
Sure. At the end of the day, we really you really have to start off from the beginning. I mean, that's the case with any kind of initiative. Is you have to look at first of all your stakeholders and who you're really trying to touch and who are your customers in terms of who's going to be the recipients of the outputs of that project. So asking them, engaging them early in the process, asking them what their goals are, and determining if and how they have sustainability measures and sustainability goals for your project is a very significant part of that whole initial scoping assessment. So that's kind of the first part. You need to establish that in your charter. You establish that as kind of your mandate for the project and all the work that you're going to be undertaking over the next X number of months or even years. Now, beyond that, if you're looking at starting up your project team and looking at how you actually operate and how you're actually going to be completing your work, that sustainability is really a big part of it, because you need to be as efficient as you can possibly be with the resources you have at your disposal. We know that we have a fixed budget. We also know we have fixed sets of resources, and managing those two variables really is critical if you're going to be able to deliver on expectations. So working with the team, working in how you establish working methods, continuously improving those working methods by re-engaging the team, seeing what's working, what's not, co-locating where possible, but leveraging virtual meetings and virtual communications is obviously a key part of how you become a sustainable project team. And at the end of the day, monitoring and managing your team and how you're keeping to both the schedule and how you're using your resources as well. So a combination of all those is really how you make sure you're a sustainable organization, and it's sustainable in terms of both your team as well as in the eyes of your customer.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'd like to get some questions from the audience. Are any of you dealing with sustainability issues in your processes, in your teams? There's a microphone out in the audience. We certainly welcome questions and creating a nice conversation.
I'd like to ask the first question, if it's all right. So in the complex process of any pharma discovery, development, manufacturing program, which is developed over many years, clearly different technologies come into play, and the point of my question is to discuss the regulatory issues around making changes where you might be using different packaging, different transportation approaches, maybe even different processes or solvents and so on within the actual development process. And in each of your perspectives, can you speak about that a bit? Is like what are sort of nuts and bolts that people have to deal with when they want to implement new ideas that may be more sustainable environmentally, for example, in the course of that process?
Can I start? Because yours is going to be more detailed. So the wonderful thing about working at the front end of a facility when you're dealing with electric power is typically when you're primarily at a pharma facility or a hospital or any kind of production facility, you treat the electric power primarily at the front end, and the type of load really is immaterial because you're substituting for the electric power. And I mean, over the years, I can't tell you how many customers said, "Yeah, but my electric needs are different." Well, you look at their specs, you look at the equipment they're going to install, and you look at the input specs, and it's the same as everybody else's. So, no matter who the equipment is from, they have voltage regulation standards, they have harmonic standards. Usually the problem is their load puts more harmonics onto the bus or has a poor power factor. I mean, they usually cause their own problems. But from the utility side or from the output of the UPS side, the load really doesn't matter. I mean, we have a certain impedance, we regulate to a certain percentage, and that part all works. So, in fact, oftentimes when I'm at a show like this, they say, "Well, you protect this piece of equipment from this manufacturer," and I say, "I don't know," because when we go and a customer installs a system, we almost never know what we're protecting, and to me, that's the beauty, because we don't really care what we're protecting. It could be pumps, it could be drives, it could be chillers, it could be, processes that you guys do in this industry that I have no clue. But 25 years ago, I put a system in the heart of Brazil. It was protecting It was at a Pfizer, I think it was a horse vaccine plant. It was protecting what I was told was fermentation. And you say, okay, so what are you protecting? So all we were doing was backing up the vacuum pumps. Now, to me, that seemed silly because I came from the data processing world. What do you mean we're backing up vacuum pumps for a fermentation process? But the customer said, oh, that's real important. Okay, thank you for nodding. It took me 20 years to realize how important it was now that we do more in your industry. But for the UPS, it doesn't matter. We just give you assured clean power.
I'm glad you think I'm going to be more in detail than you are.
You know more. I firmly believe you know more that goes on in the building than I do.
So from my perspective, for me as a project manager, I literally know a lot less about what we're actually going to be doing, right? So my expertise is more kind of in process, right? In project management process and tools and methods. So, but where I rely on, who I rely on is really the team itself, and focusing on how to engage the team and making sure that whatever kind of needs and details, things like regulatory requirements, things like, again, we're going to talk about sustainability goals. What are all those inputs and how do we deliver them? Now, when you're talking about multi-year projects, that becomes very difficult to do if you're going to look at a project from today all the way out for 2 years. Or probably even more if you're talking about just discovery to delivery kind of project. But like our previous speaker was talking about, if your strategic time horizon is really just 6 months, how can we be planning methods and processes and equipment 2 years out? Because by the time we get to it, it's probably going to be obsolete, or at least even if it's still relevant, it's not going to be the best of breed. So the best thing that one of the things that I recommend is taking fairly short time horizons, planning on over those short time horizons, and constantly reevaluating how we're progressing over the next period of time. So that means if you have a 2-year project, instead of planning out 2 years in great detail and looking at here's equipment and this is when we're going to buy it and all those kinds of things, say, okay, we're going to look out 2 years, and we're going to do some rough cuts on what work is going to need to happen in each of those periods, but only really look at the next 6 months. And how are we going to really execute on 6 months, and almost look at that as a project in of itself. Let's plan that. Let's look at the technology that's in front of us and really plan for that and execute against that. And then as we start approaching the next wave, then we start assessing the next round of technology, the next round of equipment, so on and so forth. So by the time you actually are reaching your final destination, you are looking at implementing equipment that is much more in line with what your long-term goals would have been, and most likely are exceeding them, because the way that technology in a lot of areas it's actually exceeding what we thought was going to be the case 10 years ago. It might look completely different, but at the end of the day, still be meeting our goals in a lot of ways, and also helping us be sure that we are as relevant and we're implementing the right tools for what we're trying to achieve.
Questions from the audience. Who here is dealing with sustainability issues, whether it's processes, materials, people? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
We might have to pick someone at random. You know what? I'm having a thought, Claudia. Let's see if you like this idea. I think it would be interesting to know more about who's in the room. And I'm thinking that we could take a moment. We have a little time. I'd be very happy for anybody who'd like to pass the microphone around. Just let everyone here, just introduce yourself and whatever you want to tell us about what you do. And I think that may emerge some interesting ideas that we can confront our panelists with. So I'm going to start with you because you look like a brave person.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Hoyeon Han, and I am working, I'm a new engineer actually in a biopharmaceutical industry right now. And I would like to learn more about biopharmaceutical in general. So I thought that this panel is interesting to learn and come and participate.
Hi, my name is Shilpa Permar. I'm a system admin for LIMS, and I just wanted to attend this seminar so I can refresh, things that I've learned in the last 10 years.
Hi, I'm Linda Anderson with Spark Creative Concepts. I'm here from a totally different perspective. I'm a marketing support person, but I need to know what my clients are facing so that I can help them bridge gaps in their communication within their company and with their clients.
Alex McKinnon. I work with Mike, Director of Sales for USDM Life Sciences, here for industry information and networking.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yen Lai. I'm from Eli Lilly. I'm actually in formulation development. So I'm coming here to learn new things. Yeah, I'm also in the EIP team, which is doing the green effort from our company. So it's good to hear what is new out there that I can bring back to the company. Thank you. Yes. Actually, can I ask a question? So I'm not in manufacturing, but I know in manufacturing now there are some company who are using disposable like a tank because in upfront cost is less, and for the facility that are manufacturing multiple product, that will be easier for them in the cleaning step. So how is that? What is the trade-off of using the disposable one and compared to the stainless steel, the one that's standard that been used in industry? And what is the trade-off you have to make between the sustainability and efficiency and also cost?
Well, that's, and I can just comment, not as necessarily an expert, but just sort of from my own gut feel about it. It sounds as though you're kind of replacing, capital cost with expense. So it seems to me like that's a case where I would almost look at it as a business opportunity in a lot of ways for somebody creative to look at how the cleaning and processing can take place. So in the end, if I look at tanks and tank cleaning and preparation between batches, it sounds as though there's an extensive cleansing process that's associated with it. So somebody's come up with basically a very simple idea of saying, okay, well, if it's that expensive, it's that complicated, well, let's just make it so you just wrap it up and throw it out. Almost like I'm gonna think of almost like the putting aluminum foil in your pan when you're roasting something. You just have to crumple it up and throw it away rather than have to clean the pan, right? A little bit of a simplified version of it, but still the same idea. Now, I'm going to go back to my introduction. I was talking about lean manufacturing, and lean came around the automotive space. And one of the things that really what happened, one of the most cost-effective or most costly steps in manufacturing vehicles was actually the process of exchanging dies for stamping metal parts. So if you think of fenders and all that, it starts out as a sheet of metal, and in order to change out what kind of part you're going to make, it would take hours for them to have to change these dies because they have to be placed very specifically and very precisely. So in order to make as efficient as possible, they would run thousands of parts, and they would put them in warehouses. And then they would spend hours or maybe even days or weeks moving these dies or replacing these dies, and then doing the same process all over again. Then after maybe 6 months, they would have enough parts to make a car. Seems very efficient, right? Well, what Toyota's innovation was that they developed a process where they could change those dies out in 1 minute. So effectively what they were able to do was change over between different types of parts very quickly, and hence became lean manufacturing. So if I look at if I look at and apply the same principles to these kinds of batch processes, chemical reactions, and they're taking place in the pharma industry, well, to me, replacing an inefficient cleaning process with what I would call an inefficient disposal process doesn't sound like it's a sustainable way to do it. I think there's probably, if there's ways that we can look at things, maybe look at the problem a little bit differently, there's probably opportunities for effectively taking the same kind of lean manufacturing principles and seeing what we can do to actually make that switch over more rapid, rather than doing something like having to dispose of an entire tank. So.
Thank you. I will have to say that the best answer, the shortest answer I've heard to that question is, it depends. But we'll follow up on that. We'll talk about that.
I'm John Haggerty. I'm a clinical trial lab services project manager. So I really work with manufacturers as vendors as we just procure our antibodies for whatever new trial they're working with. And oftentimes we work with investigational antibodies, and we have to transition those investigational items that we use and transition them to GMP products, and then that whole side of procurement, and which is often down the road. The most difficult, challenging about that is one of the challenges of clinical trials is, are we going to hit the number of subjects or patients within the next year? So if we want to say 100 people, we have to order that kind of the items and the supplies for that. And oftentimes we don't. And then when we make a large order, we'll probably use 10% of the supplies and the antibodies of the GMP supplies, and 90% of it will expire. So that's just one challenge. But of course, I'm here just to learn more about the industry and really understand the different sustainability processes and innovations I could apply to that.
Thanks. That's a good challenge. Do you want to pass the mic along?
I missed what the question was.
Just introduce yourself.
I'm Michael Tangretti. I'm on the marketing team at Advantapure, and we market single-use systems for fluid transfer, for sampling and storage. And we're a privately owned company, and I'll say that from a sustainability viewpoint, one of the things that my company did that's a little unique to this conversation is that we, the owners of the company, chose to turn the company into an ESOP. So now we are 49% employee-owned. And one of his reasons for doing that, other than for having a succession plan for the organization, was that we feel in our market space that we're an important and viable customer or a supplier to the industry, and who relies on us for validated systems. And so it's important to the industry to know that we'll be available and we will be existing 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, and have not been absorbed in a merger or acquisition, and lose the talent that we have that has been with our company for 65 years, some people there for a good 30, 35 of those years, and lose our place in the industry and be absorbed and diminished at that point. So that was our way of executing one of our sustainability plans.
Thank you.
My name is Farman Kaleye, from far away from Conshohocken, PA, President and CEO of Nexttown, which is basically a platform, a service for field technicians to be in contact, utilizing our IoT platform to be connected with Command and Control Center. When Mr. Hall, your technicians are assembling and building a power unit, they can follow work instructions utilizing augmented reality in real time and transform all your paper process into a digital experience. So that's what we build. We build mobile apps that can be delivered in real time utilizing smart headgears, like hands-free So that's what we built. And I was very interested in the sustainability and all that presentation. Thank you.
One more person there.
Yeah, hi. My name is Shrikant Velineni. I work as a project manager at One Pharma. It's located in Dayton. And I do project management of ANDA products development, technology transfer of generic pharmaceuticals. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I'm going to start in the front again. I'll come get that.
Hi, I'm Peter Vrew. I'm a chemical engineer, do process engineering and process safety work, and I came to the event to do some networking and learn a little bit about project management.
Hello, John Capance, also process engineering, involved with process equipment, packaging equipment, serialization. Same thing, networking, learn about project management. It was a very good workshop before for Michael, thank you. And I do have a question about the flywheel technology. And maybe I missed this in the presentation, but what's the largest unit you build? And I guess my application would be motor